Hey VC, it's Jim. I haven't been making videos in a little while. I've been dealing with mostly the house lately, and we're rebuilding our house. And that's getting towards the end of the process, we hope. And it's taking a lot of time, so I haven't been able to do much as far as records go. But I wanted to take this morning and kind of go through some recent vinyl finds and say hello again. Most of these records are from the late 70s through, I guess, the 80s. I just noticed that most of them are sort of punk-ish. Some are punk, some are ish. So we'll start with actually the late 70s, and I would consider this more ish than punk, but it's Nina Hagen Band, 1978. I think this is a UK pressing of a German record on CBS. And Nina Hagen was a German singer who was kind of doing a bit of a punk thing in the late 70s and into the early 80s. And the word new wave started to come around, I guess, in the late 70s, early 80s, somewhere around there. Most of you know the story behind the term, and it's not a term I like to use too much, but things that were, less angry and more odd got put into new wave, and things that were more loud, noisy, and angry in sort of the Sex Pistols vein, that became the official punk thing. But I always loved Nina Hagen's spirit. This has got a fun cover of White Punks on Dope by the Tubes. Tubes weren't a punk band by any means, but they definitely had that kind of independent spirit that a lot of the punk bands had, and I really liked that about them. And the cover of White Punks on Dope in German is pretty fun on this. The rest of the music on this, I don't think it holds up that well. 40 years later, I guess, something like that. But it's still interesting to go back and listen to. Kind of fun. The next one is New Toy, which is an EP by Lena Lovitch from 1981, I think. And this record held up way better than I expected it to. I remembered New Toy, and I never had this EP, so this was new to me. I think I had one or two records of hers, and I hadn't listened to them since probably the early 80s. And going back and listening to this record, the music is definitely better than what I remember, and definitely worth listening to. New Toy is a sort of typical synth pop kind of quirky early 80s track, but the rest of the tracks actually they're pretty good. Worth taking a listen to. It makes me want to listen to more of Lena Lovitch's stuff from that time period. Same time period, 81-ish. Wall of Voodoo. This is their first, I guess it's an EP. I don't remember if it's technically a rec or an LP. I think it's only like 6 songs, so I think it's an EP. Yeah. 1980. This has the cover of Ring of Fire that they do, which is just a phenomenal version of Ring of Fire. It's just super lo-fi. Actually a great label too. But I'm a big fan of Wall of Voodoo, and it was nice to come across this first EP. And they only recorded, this is with Stan Ridgway, and they only recorded a few records with Stan Ridgway, I think 2 maybe, and this. So not many. And then they kind of went on later to do more records. And their records weren't bad after Ridgway left, but there's just something about his voice and his songwriting that was so strong that it's really hard to connect to the later records in the same way that I connected to the earlier records. Good stuff. I think I showed this before, and I'm showing it again only because this is Rap Music for Rap People, which is a punk collection from 1981, I think. I'm showing it again because I came across a later collection, Rap Music for Rap People, Volume 3, which I'll show in a minute. And I just kind of wanted to refresh myself on this. I might have shown this in one of my earlier videos. If not, it's a great record. And this was a record that meant a lot to me when I was, I guess, junior high maybe. I think I was in 8th grade when I got this record. And this is the poster inside. Well, we'll try and open it up. Oh, that was upside down. So we'll try it this way. That makes more sense. So the record has Dead Kennedys, DOA, Circle Jerks, Flipper, Avengers, Black Flag, Bad Brains, TSOL, Crucifix, and the Dills. This is like a who's who of punk in the early 80s. And it's just so, I should say really of American punk. It's just such a strong collection of songs and bands. It really kind of, I was listening to a lot of this music at the time, but collections in particular were an easier way to get to a lot of these bands that weren't easily accessible. Most of the record stores that were around here at that time, you couldn't just go in and find punk records. They just didn't have them. But occasionally they'd have a collection like this. And I remember picking up this, and there was another one called Erg, which is a music war, which was like a, it wasn't terribly punk. There was a few things on there that you might consider punk, but it was mostly, I guess what now you'd call indie or alternative. And I remember a lot of collections like this were the way that I found out about certain bands. Like, I think this was the first time I ever heard Bad Brains. And it might have been the first time I ever heard TSOL, but I think I had already been listening to them by then. And so, but a lot of these were just introductions to different bands that I didn't know about. And they were great. And that's really what they were for. And even today, it's still easier for me to find these collections of punk than it is to find old punk records, because punk records are ridiculously difficult to find around here. I think all of the Silicon Valley people that are sort of my age, who have way too much money now, they all collect punk records, which is really funny. But it sucks for me because it means that, they're spending ridiculous amounts of money on punk records, and I can't get any. So And that's what the Bay Area is like. I have no idea if the rest of the country is like that for punk, but it's certainly almost impossible to find anything fun here as far as punk goes. They just don't show up. It's not even that they're expensive; they just don't exist. Next is a pop punk band from the early '80s, the Surf Punks. This is their third album called Locals Only. This was a pretty fun record. I had this in high school. This is 1982, I believe. The Surf Punks they weren't really punk. They were, I guess pop punk. Pretty lightweight, but really energetic and really fun and goofy and weird and just a real kick. The band was started by Dennis Dragon, who is the brother of Daryl Dragon. Daryl Dragon, aka the captain of Captain and Tennille. Dennis, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, played drums for the Byrds and the Beach Boys at one point, and then started the Surf Punks in the mid-'70s. And just made a bunch of goofy songs about beach culture in LA. They lived across the street from Zuma Beach. And so a lot of the whole shtick of the band was really, the whole locals only kind of thing, the beach surfer crowd versus the valley crowd, that would come over from San Fernando Valley but they made a bunch of fun records, and it's fun to listen back to them. And at the time, I didn't really think too much about it, but listening to them now, I realize how accomplished the musicianship is on it, which I never really entered my mind at the time. But it makes sense because Dennis Dragon comes from a really strong musical background, and so did all the people surrounding him. And the band was really just a fun thing for them. But there's a lot of sort of Zappa-esque qualities to the music. A little noodly, a little jazzy, a little overly complicated punk. It actually reminds me a bit of kind of what would happen in the late 80s with bands like Primus, where you get these really accomplished musicians playing things that are sort of like punk, and get kind of interesting. Or even, honestly, even bands like the Minutemen, which were doing some pretty jazz-inspired punk at the time. And that was at the time of these guys even. Good stuff. Record on a reprise from 82, I believe. After that, we've got another 82 record. Can't remember. This is the third record from The Replacements, 83. This is Hootenanny from The Replacements. I believe that this is probably the 2016 pressing of this because it's just so clean and shiny. There's no age to it, but I didn't look up the number. I'm just assuming that it is. This was a great record from The Replacements, and I'm actually a little surprised that I don't hear more about this band in the VC. I can't actually remember anyone showing a Replacements record in any of the videos that I've watched, and I've watched a lot of videos. And that's kind of strange to me because they were such a great band. Maybe just everybody assumes that everybody has replacements and listens to them all the time. um, but the thing about the replacements that I always really connected to is they have this quality that's not quite punk and not quite roots rock and not quite Americana, but they're just this sort of blended up version of all of that, and just made some great stuff. Their earliest stuff is really just them kind of, you know, sticking a finger in your eye. You know, it's just like it's got a lot of punk attitude because it's you know, they had the we'll put it out there and see what happens, and we don't really care. And I think that they did really care about their music, but they didn't. They never wanted it to appear that way. And as they grew up through the '80s, they started producing, you know, stronger and stronger music because they always could. They just kind of literally chose not to. You know, Westerberg had all of his issues, and that played a lot into the early music. But I'd love to see people talk more about the replacements and what their experiences are with them, because I know that a lot of you listen to them. I just never hear about it. Such great music, and I love this third record. I thought this was when they really started to kind of come together and produce more and more solid work. And then, you know, as they went forward with, you know, Pleased to Meet Me and Tim and all those records, I think they got stronger and stronger to a certain extent. Anyways, I'll talk more about replacements as I find more of them. Then I got hold of this one, which was kind of a fun little 12-inch single that I found. It's Red Hot Chili Peppers, Get Up and Jump. This, I think, must be the first single that they ever released. I don't see anything else on Discogs from before this. These were 2 tracks from their first record. This is Get Up and Jump and Baby Appeal. The first record from the Chili Peppers was produced by Andy Gill of Gang of Four. And it really had his sensibility on it, and I always loved the first record. But this, you know, I listened to this 12-inch, and it is so 80s. It is almost painful to listen to now, because it's basically taking 2 like really kind of fun punk funk Chili Pepper songs from the first record and throwing the club mix treatment on them, and it's really terrible. It's just awful. It just, you know, it's dragging out the beat and trying to kind of make it sound like the kind of, you know, Brooklyn rap that was happening at the time. And it's just kind of awful. But I'm glad to have it because it's a fun little thing to have, and it was, you know, just a couple bucks, worth doing. But yeah, it doesn't hold up at all. This next one is something that I'm actually curious. I haven't re-listened to it. I just picked this up. This is X, Ain't Love Grand. This is their 5th album. And this was the only X album that I hadn't picked up. And I didn't think I was going to. And then I found it in the used bins, and it wasn't too much. And I thought, all right. And so I picked it up. And I remember even at the time when I bought this record in '85, I was really disappointed by this record. It was intentionally more commercial from the band. They were really frustrated at the time that, you know, they hadn't had more commercial success. and they were looking for a way to kind of break into, really top 40 radio. And they tried with this record. And it's much more kind of roots rock, kind of straight ahead rock and roll. And songs like Burnin' House of Love. I don't hate this record, but I remember at the time just thinking I was let down and disappointed by this record and feeling like, okay, well, maybe that's the end for X. And in a way it kind of was. I think Billy Zoom played on one more record, but this was really the end of it. There were a couple songs on here that felt more like X to me, like My Soul Cries Your Name. But songs like All or Nothing, yeah. But I do want to listen to it again and see if I feel the same way about it. Sometimes it's good to listen to things where a band just kind of takes a different direction and think of it as a different era of a band or even a different band and see what you think. And I'd like to do that with that record. So I'm looking forward to listening to it again, maybe with fresh ears. Maybe I'll dislike it the same, or maybe I'll like it more or less. I don't know. But I'm curious. Okay. Next we have Rap Music for Rap People, Volume 3, which is why I brought in Volume 1 on the previous. So this record is one I never had, and I just came across it this week, and so I grabbed it. And I mentioned how much I loved the first record. This I listened to, and actually it has some great stuff on it. This is 1987. The bands on this are DI, Corrosion of Conformity, Doggy Style, Raw Power, Attitude, Naked Ray Gun, Verbal Abuse, Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper, White Flag, Sacrilege, Adrenaline OD, Frontline, and The Adolescents. This is kind of the period in punk, so 87. This is when punk was really starting to kind of meld with metal, and so a lot of the bands on here really have that kind of punk heavy metal sound. Some of it, I think, is just that the punk bands from the early 80s started to figure out how to play their instruments, and so now they were sounding like they knew what they were doing. There was definitely a lot of that going on, but there was also just a kind of people were kind of landing on this sound that was a lot more kind of guitar, power chord driven. That said, and it's not that I didn't like that. It's just that I felt like at this period, and this is where I started to kind of slowly lose interest in punk at that time, because it felt like the kind of punk sound was being kind of codified and defined, and that made it less interesting to me because there was too much of one band sounding like the next band. That said, there's some good stuff on it, and it's nice to come back to this later, to this period later, and see what it sounds like. I think some of the standout tracks on here. Actually, there's a couple covers on here that are really fun. DI's cover of Ballroom Blitz and Adolescent's cover of All Day and All of the Night. They're both really good. But, Naked Ray Gun, Doggy Style, Mojo Nixon. The fun thing about this is, Mojo Nixon stands out on this record because, I don't know that I would ever call Mojo Nixon punk, but almost more than anybody on this record, he had the punk attitude. And I actually have one of his records to show in a minute. Yeah, so that's Rap Music for Rap People, Volume 3. one more collection. This will be the last collection that I have, which is Flipside tunes. So from Flipside Records. This is vinyl fanzine number 3, 1987 as well, I believe. And this is another good collection and has, let's see, Adolescence, Lemonheads, Circle Jerks, Doggy Style, MIA, 7 Seconds, Shonen Knife, Bulimia Banquet. A lot of like prototypical 80s punk on here. I'm trying to think of what the songs are. Let's see. Adolescence, It's the Liar, Bulimia Banquet, Calloused, Shonen Knife, Cycling is Fun, which is one of my favorite tracks from them. 7 Seconds, Does a Place. Circle Jerks cover Fortunate Son on here. Let's see. Tesco V and White Flag. Hot Rails to Hell. Oh, Lemonheads, Hate Your Friends. That's a great track. So again, you know, I'm a fan of these collections from that period. I seem to be able to find them much easier than finding all of the actual records. So I'm happy about that. And then the last record I have to show is Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper, Root Hog or Die. This was 89, I think, if I remember right, somewhere around there. Yeah, 89. These guys were incredibly fun to see live. I saw them live a few times, and they were only together for about, I think, 4 years or so, from about 85 to 89, or right around there. Mojo would play guitar and sing, and Skid Roper would play his stand-up bass or, you know, whatever. Play a few different things, if I remember right. Play guitar and bass, and but they were really fun. Just Nixon was ridiculously over the top in his lyrics, and super, you know, politically incorrect, and but just fucking fun. I think the track that he didn't ever really have any pop hits, but the track that he tried to make, I think, a a single on this was Debbie Gibson is Pregnant with My Two-Headed Love Child. I think he couldn't get MTV to play that track, and so he stopped showing up on MTV. But he did a lot of things like that. He did like, you know, songs like David Geffen Must Die, and like everything he was doing was to sort of try and piss off somebody in the music industry. Yeah, probably worked, but he was fun. Sort of roots rock, punk, hillbilly. I don't know. It's hard to describe them. But I saw him with Beat Farmers a few times, and just ridiculously great shows. Absolutely phenomenal shows. Anyways, that's the stack, and it's kind of fun to be doing this again. I hope to do a couple more and put them out there, and maybe I'll try and do that soon and get them in front of you. Hope everybody's doing well. And again, thank you for taking the time to watch this, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.